Hello everybody, my name is Bad Karma Lucky, and this is episode 1 of the Fantasy Twitch. This is going to be a somewhat regular podcast that I'm going to be recording on my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/badkarmalucky. And you can find this hopefully on iTunes and the Google Play Store if I ever find out how to upload it there, as well as a YouTube channel I'll be uploading it to and providing a link inside the Discord chat. If you're not aware of what the Discord is, type in !Discord in the Twitch chat right now, or check the comments on YouTube video and we'll get it there for you. This podcast is going to be focused on fantasy football, and it's going to go over everything that I want to talk about with fantasy football, pretty much. So this first episode is going to be all about what the crap fantasy football is. Not everyone knows. Some people are football fans, but they've never heard of fantasy football, or they've never cared to play it because they think it sounds weird because they've never tried to learn what it actually is. Or you've just never heard of it and you want to know, or you think it's something that it's not. So I'm going to do my best to try and explain it to you guys, and hopefully it'll make sense by the time we're done. So that's what this first episode's all about, so let's just get right into it. Let us just talk about what exactly fantasy football is. Essentially, fantasy football is a game between several individuals who become general managers or owners of their own virtual football team. And what they are doing is they are composing a team of real NFL players who use real football stats in a unique scoring system to compete against one another. Each player or each general manager will draft the players onto their team, and then based upon how those players perform, they could win or lose against the other team. So for example, if a player scores a touchdown, they get points on their team because the player they drafted scored a real touchdown in real NFL football during that week. Once those points are calculated up at the end of the week, you find out who are the winners and who are the losers. And this goes for 13, 14 weeks throughout the season. Then there's some playoffs, and it usually ends by the time the regular season is over in the NFL season. Traditionally, most of these fantasy leagues, which is, by the way, I think probably about $1 billion industry at this point with the way that it's supported by NFL.com and ESPN and other services. But traditionally, it's composed of a bunch of friends or coworkers, or maybe a community group of some sort that want to get together and have a reason to compete against each other or talk trash to each other. Who knows? Sometimes you might see professionals get in on this. So there will be ESPN or other sporting broadcasters who will compose a league together, and they will be creating a league against each other. Even professional athletes sometimes get it on their own fantasy football leagues and draft each other and play against each other. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of really cool ways to do it. And there are even daily competitions in some venues like FanDuels or DraftKings. You can do individual days, like if there's a Thursday night game, there are different types of bets that people can do, or there are weekly pools that you can get in where you don't have to actually form a league or be a part of a league. You can select different players in those types of systems. That is for the really hardcore players that really want to get into it and have a really strong craving to bet some money out there in the world. So that's the basic concept of what it is. We'll go over more of that. The agenda for this first episode is to talk about what fantasy football is, talk about the different types of league structures, talk about the different types of services that you can use to play fantasy football, the different types of information sources, go over some advice for beginners, first-timers that have never played the game before, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the Twitch chat as well as from the Discord. So we'll go from there. Essentially, the fantasy football stuff started way back when Y'all, it's almost as old as football is today, pretty much. I think it goes back to like the 60s or 70s. People wrote down stats on paper and competed against each other. There were board games created or draft kits created to keep track of everything before the internet was huge and dominated everything. So this has definitely been around for a really long time, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. There's even been a TV show that was based on fantasy football called The League. Started in 2009, and it's been several seasons long. It was, I believe, on FX and is on Netflix that you can find out. So if you really want to find out the goofiness of fantasy football, check out The League on Netflix. It's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. So now we're going to go over league structures, how certain kinds of leagues work. First and foremost, what you want to know is each league that's set up, there's one person that is essentially the commissioner or owner of the league, and they set everything up. They go to a service like ESPN or NFL.com, maybe Yahoo or CBS Sports, and they set the league up. They choose a league type that they would like to play as, and then they set up the rosters and they set up the scoring systems and everything like that. So most of the time the rosters, and traditionally speaking, rosters composed of a quarterback, 2 running backs, probably 2 wide receivers in a flex position, which can be a running back, wide receiver, or a tight end, 1 other tight end position, a kicker, and then a team defense / special teams unit. And then after that, there's some bench positions, depending on the league size or whatever they determine. It's about 5 or 6 players. I think traditionally speaking, the ESPN standard leagues are 6 bench positions. So that gives you an idea of what it is. And when you draft your players, you draft a starting quarterback. You probably want to have a backup. And then you draft 2 starting running backs. You want to draft 2 starting wide receivers, a tight end, and then 1 extra player as a flex position on any of those positions, or running back, wide receiver, tight end, a kicker, and then a team defense, and then some reserves. The type of leagues that you're looking at are going to be standard draft leagues, which means each team is given a draft position. If there are 10 teams, each player drafts their players in either position 1 or 10 or anywhere in between. And there's either a round robin or a round system where once player 10 goes, it goes back to player 1, or a snake draft, which you go 1 through 10 and then 10 through 1. Then 1 through 10, and then 10 through 1. That way, if you have the first pick in the draft, you're going to have the last pick in the second round, so that it's more even. Some would say if you're in the first 3 picks, it's never going to be even, but at least it tries. So if you have pick number 1, you're not going to pick again until pick number 20 if you're in a 10-team league. Then you have auction drafts, and those are unique because each team is given a certain salary. Virtual salary, say it's $200, and then they have to actually bid on the players that they get on their team. So if you are the first person in your draft, or you have draft number 1, you nominate a player to go up on the auction block, and then everybody has a chance to bid on that player. And whether you want to bid $1 or $100, everyone gets a chance to win that player. So you could actually win, say, the first 4 or 5 players, and nobody else would have a player on the board. That's really unlikely because those first players are usually really expensive and you can't go over your budget. But that's how that works. Personally, in my opinion, the auction drafts are the most fun, the most entertaining. You can, it's about 3 hours. If you have a 10 to 12 team league and you're drafting 5 or 6 bench positions, you've got a lot of rounds that you have to go through, and it takes a long time. It's about 3 hours to get through an auction draft, and it's a lot of fun. You get a lot of guys together talking a lot of trash to each other. People make fun of other picks. People, try and make everyone bid higher than they should. It's all strategy in those auction drafts, and it's really funny to see what people get up to. Then you have dynasty leagues. These are for pretty serious fantasy football players. They require multiple season commitments. And then essentially after the initial draft in the dynasty league's first season, players remain on the same roster from one season to the next unless they are traded or released. Each year after the first season, the drafts are held only for rookies, so that fantasy owners can be in tune. You have to be in tune with college players more than any other type of league. So it's pretty crazy on how those leagues work. Similar to the Dynasty League, you have the Keeper Leagues. It's kind of a combination between the Standard Leagues and the Dynasty Leagues. Essentially, most players are drafted every year, but owners are allowed to keep a certain amount of players. So whether it's 3 or 5 or however many players there are, if you have some superstars that you want to keep hold of, you lock those players in and then you draft every other position in your team. It's pretty crazy. For me personally, I've never actually played a Dynasty or a Keeper League. I've never had anyone want to. I know they're pretty popular, but I have never participated in them, so not quite sure how well they work out. There's IDP leagues. These ones are pretty interesting, pretty rare though. Essentially, an IDP league is a standard league that utilizes individual defensive players instead of team defense. So instead of drafting one team as your defense or special teams unit, you draft 5 or 6 defensive players and you go off of their stats. It's kind of unique. Not many people do it. There you go. Survivor leagues are one I think sound the most entertaining, but could suck really bad for most of the people in the league. So Survivor leagues can be any type of draft. However, they use most time they use standard or auction. What they do is the scoring systems vary depending on what the league owner wants to do. But the unique piece of the standard leagues is on a weekly basis, the lowest scoring team is eliminated for the entire season. So you don't have to worry about head-to-head record. You only have to be a fraction of a point higher than the next lowest person. Because if you are the lowest in the league, you lose and you're out for the rest of the year. So you have to survive the entire season, and it's pretty interesting. So you could have a killer team that just lays an egg week 1 and you're done. You're done for the season. It's a pretty dramatic league, and I feel bad for those who get knocked out in the first few rounds, first few weeks. So there's that. If you have any questions about the type of leagues, guys, make sure that you hold on to them to the end. We're going to go through a question and answer at the end, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of questions about the types of leagues. So think about them, mull them over, and save them for the end here. All right, scoring systems. Now, here's an interesting way the scoring system works. So like I said before in the preamble of the show, the scoring system is based off of real life stats. So real life NFL players put up numbers, and the box office the box score determines what the fantasy league teams score. So for a standard scoring league, if a running back is running the ball, for every 10 yards that he runs, or any player really, any 10 yards that any player rushes for, you get 1 point. Typically, any passing yardage that you get 1 point for every 25 yards. Any touchdown will get you 6 points. Field goals will get you 3 points. Extra points will get you 1 point. Sometimes missed field goals and sacks and interceptions and fumbles will give you negative points. So if you have a running back that runs for 100 yards and a touchdown, you'll get 10 points for the 100 yards and 6 points for the touchdown. And sometimes you'll get a bonus because they went over the 100-yard milestone. So that could be like a 2-point bonus or a 1-point bonus. So that player now has 18 to 19 points, depending on whatever bonuses they have. And in some leagues, they do point per reception as well. So for every catch that a player has, they get a point. Those are personally my favorite because it spreads out the valuable players pool, essentially. Wide receivers and running backs that are receiving threats become more valuable than the standard running back player, who usually is the top of the food chain when it comes to fantasy football. So that's kind of the basic way as to how scoring system works. Touchdowns are obviously what you want to go for. The more touchdown a player has, the more valuable they're going to be in fantasy football. But also attempts is a good indicator as to a player's worth, because more attempts means more possibilities of yardage and touchdowns, that kind of thing. So if you're drafting a quarterback, you want a quarterback that can put up numbers, but you also want one that puts up a lot of passes. If a player's throwing for 40 yards or 40 attempts on average, they're probably going to have more yardage and more touchdowns than a quarterback that throws for 20 attempts a game. So that's kind of how that works. And it's pretty unique. It's one of the most important things that you can examine or pay attention to in fantasy football, because every league's different. You could make an assumption that one league scores the same as the next league, but they're different, so you draft the same way and you lose in one league and win in another. It's pretty important to pay attention to the scoring. Every league's different, and the commissioner of the league can set up his own scoring. So pay attention to that, as well as the type of the league, because it's very, very, very important. So next we're going to talk about the types, or the best services to actually run a fantasy football league off of. One of the most popular, or I should say a few of the most popular services are Yahoo Sports. It has a great fantasy football service. NFL.com, ESPN, CBS Sports, and then probably, I don't know, there's a bunch of other different ones after that. Those are the top four. Those are pretty much the only four I've ever really played in. I know there's like a Flea Flicker one. There's some standalone services, but those are the four that you probably are going to be in. I recommend either NFL.com, ESPN, or Yahoo Fantasy, because they have great mobile app support, and they're pretty solid. So those are the top three that I recommend. CBS Sports also has one that's okay, so you can try and check that out too. Information services, obviously those services are going to have information on fantasy football as well, because they always have articles and there's shows on ESPN and NFL.com dedicated to fantasy football. There's a lot of great podcasts out there. One of my favorites is the Fantasy Focus on ESPN. Definitely check that one out. They talk about all the players and they give you a ton of information. So highly recommend that one. It's really great, but definitely check through a lot of the services out there. One of my favorites is rotowire.com. That one's really good. You also have the FF Toolbox. Bleacherreport.com is pretty great. So there's a lot of services out there that will put up weekly rankings, draft kits, a lot of different information. There's tons and tons of information out there to be had. You can pick up magazines at the store if you really want to go that far. A lot of people I see pretty much just get like the most recent articles posted and print those out instead of magazines, because they'll take them to their draft and use those for information. Use what you want. There's tons of information out there. It's all about what you feel comfortable with using. You could use it all together, then take whichever one you think sounds best, or you can rely on one as your favorite and move on. So if you have any questions about the types of services to run fantasy football off of, or where to get your information, make sure to keep that till the end. We're going to run a Q&A, and we'll take those questions there. Now it comes down to the section where we want to talk about what kind of advice that we can give to beginners when they first start playing fantasy football. The biggest piece of advice I can give to anyone who's never played before and is looking to play now is read the rules for the league. Go through the league rules, go through the scoring settings, know them by heart. Internalize them, make sure you're not making a mistake, and always read them before the draft. Whether it's the day before the draft, an hour before the draft, whatever it may be, Read them before the draft. Don't read them as soon as you join the league and then assume they're going to be the same, because commissioners are always going in and tweaking scoring systems. They might get an email or a text message from one of the players and they're like, hey, why do you have this set up this way? It should be this way. One thing to be aware of, if you're going to be a fantasy football commissioner, there's going to be a lot of this, a lot of jawing back and forth, a lot of crybabies on one hand, a lot of bullies on another hand. There's going to be a lot of jawing back and forth, and people are going to think they know the best way to run something, and they're always giving their opinions, whether you want them or not. So commissioners do make changes before the draft starts. It happens. It always happens. So always read the league rules and scoring settings before the draft starts, but not too far before the draft starts. I would recommend probably 2 or 3 hours before the draft starts, read through them all, and then maybe a half hour before the draft starts, do a refresher. You gotta know the scoring. It's going to determine how you should draft, and the draft is the most important part of your fantasy football league. That's a cardinal sin. If you do not read the league rules or you don't read the scoring settings, it is a cardinal sin, and you can't blame anyone but yourself for not knowing. That's how it works. Second piece of advice, second cardinal sin to never, ever disobey, never, ever fall into the trap of doing, is forget your fandom. Forget your fandom. Don't worry about your favorite team. Who cares if they're your favorite team? You still watch the game. Don't worry about drafting their players. Just because they're on your favorite team doesn't mean they're any better than any other player. It's only about the numbers they put up. If they don't put up numbers as good and you draft them all, guess what? You're losing your league because you chose your fandom. Don't choose your fandom. Forget it. Forget all about it. If you're ranking your quarterbacks, forget about your fandom. Do not let your heart get into the game. It happens all the time, and it shouldn't. I just saw someone in the chat say, draft with your head, not your heart. Exactly. Leave your heart out of it. Forget your fandom. Forget your fandom. I can't say it enough. Always forget your fandom. I love it when people come up to me and they ask me, hey, how do you rank these running backs? I know you're a Cowboys fan. You're probably going to put Ezekiel Elliott first. I won't. I promise you I won't. I do not use fandom when I draft. There's a lot of times I'll go into auction drafts. And by the way, I'm a Cowboys fan. I left that out of the first part. But anyway, don't use it against me. People in auction drafts always think I'm going to bid too high on Cowboys player because I'm a Cowboys fan. It's not true. Don't fall for it. If you're a fan of the Patriots, don't draft a Patriots player higher than other Patriots players just because you're a fan of theirs. Unless their name is Tom Brady or Rob Gronkowski, you're probably not going to want to draft them very high. It's the reality of the game. Okay? If you're a fan of the Giants, don't draft Eli Manning as one of your top few quarterbacks. I promise you he doesn't belong there. Just deal with it, okay? Forget your fandom. You'll have a chance to get players on your team of your favorite team if you want to. Just forget about your fandom. Cardinal sin number 2. Number 3, read the injury reports. Read the trade reports. Know who has moved to a different team. Know who is out for the season. Preseason brings a lot of injuries. There's always somebody that gets season-ending injury in a preseason game. It happens. It's always going to happen. Hopefully, your draft is taking place right before the season starts and not during preseason. Because if you draft, like, say, the first week of the preseason, and then a player gets hurt on the second or third or fourth week of the preseason, you're screwed. So hopefully your draft is taking place right before the season starts, and you know of all those injuries before you're actually going through your draft. Read the injury report. Read the trade reports. Know who has gone where. Know who is not playing. Super important. Do not draft an injured player. Just don't draft someone on the IR. If you do, you're the only one that can be blamed for it. The biggest thing I can emphasize to you as a new player, focus on the draft. The draft is how you win your league. You are going to draft your most important players. Every once in a while, you can trade a player or two, but the draft is the first step and it's the most important step. Secondly, pay attention to the waiver wire. The waiver wire is how you pick up players that don't have a team yet. That is like a draft every single week. Focus on the draft, focus on the waiver wire. If you win the draft and you win the waiver wires, you win the league. Bottom line, that's how it works. You can win the draft and lose the waiver wire and lose the league because waiver wires sometimes are golden. Sometimes you can pick up players that surprise everybody in the world and they're fantastic and they kill it for your team. Sometimes you can draft a whole bunch of bums and still trade and give away your whole team and play the waiver wire best of anyone else, and you can win the league that way. It happens. Focus on the draft, focus on the waivers. That's how it's got to work. That being said, before you go into the draft, as a new player, you're not going to know what to expect. So go to ESPN or go to Yahoo or go to NFL.com and go through their mock drafts. Look at the results of other mock drafts and where average positions are for each player. Do a few mock drafts yourself. They're quick. You can get them done really fast. You can even just go through the first few rounds and quit after that if you want to. Do mock drafts. Know what to expect. Go through the rounds, go through the motions, practice how you want to play, basically. Definitely go through the review. Go through the review. Participate in mock drafts. Definitely, 100% participate in those. It's so good for you. As a new player, even as an experienced player, you should always go through mock drafts. It's just too important. It's too important not to. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So to recap, for new players, for beginners, read the league rules, read the scoring system, know them by heart. Forget your fandom. Leave your heart out of it. Draft with your head. Read injury reports. Know who's been traded. Focus on the draft. Focus on the waiver wire. Pay attention. As long as you pay attention, you'll probably know the pulse of what's going on. Review mock drafts and participate in them. Go through all of the mock drafts. Pay attention to the analysts and how they're drafting. They usually post up their mock drafts. Pay attention to what they did. I would say one other piece is if you're going to a lot of different sources for information, take the aggregate. If you're looking at 20 different analysts, they're all going to have players in different positions on different rankings. Take the average. If one player is trending higher than another player because of a lot of people's opinions, there's a good chance that there's a reason for that, and that player is probably going to be better than the other players. So pay attention to the averages. Yeah. So that's going to do it for what I have to say for this week. Next week, we're going to focus on the top of the totem pole, if you will, on each position. But for now, we're going to take some questions if there are any from the chat. So I want to go through here and just to give you guys some information, anyone who's watching this on YouTube or listening to it on iTunes or Google Play, this is on twitch.tv live. I record it live on twitch.tv/badkarmalucky. And I have people in the chat right now watching this live that are going to be feeding me questions. So I want to make sure that I get to those because that is a great way to incorporate this into the show for you guys to hear. So first question is, have you discussed the difference between PPR leagues versus non-PPR leagues? I touched on it earlier, but I'll go into more depth. PPR stands for points per reception. Point per reception. Typically, it is 1 point per reception that players get. Meaning, if a player catches a ball in a game, he gets a point. Even if he gets 0 yards, even if he gets negative yards. If he catches the ball, that's 1 point. Huge difference in the tier lists or rankings for players if you're playing on PPR versus non-PPR. Personally, I like PPR leagues because it spreads out the player pool. You have more players that mean more than you do if you're playing non-PPR. Otherwise, non-PPR leagues have the top few running backs that are pretty much the top of the top of the food chain, and you can't get away from it. This spreads it out, which I think is really nice. So point per reception is what PPR stands for. That's the first question I ask anyone who invites me to a league is the league PPR? Is it non-PPR? That's what I want to know. One example someone in chat gives is running backs like the Patriots have. They are all run pass threats. So they can run the ball, but they catch the ball a ton. They always run swing plays and stuff where the running backs getting the ball. So huge advantage there. No different people know their play styles. That's why some running backs are more valuable because of the amount of catches that they get. One question is about betting. Yeah, absolutely. Betting is a real possibility in fantasy football. A lot of the times, players will put in money into the beginning of the league, like $20, $50, $100, $200, $500. I know someone that plays in a $500 entry fee league. And then at the end of the year, they'll pay out positions 1, 2, 3, and they'll split the winnings however they split them. 60% for first, 30% for second, and 10% for third. That's typically the split of how it works, but who knows? I play in a league that pays out 60, 30, 10 for first, second, third, but they also do a regular season winning bonus. So if you have the best record in the regular season, you get a bonus. They do weekly winners. So if you have the highest points in the league for that week, you get like $10 or $15. Can't remember how much it is. So different leagues have different bonuses and different payouts, but money is a huge factor in fantasy football. And a lot of the times it's a good way to pick up some extra cash if you know what you're doing. So there are leagues that you enter with $20, $50, whatever it may be. And like I mentioned earlier, FanDuel and DraftKings are sites that you bet in every single week. So you can do a $1 entry and then pick a team, or a $5 entry and pick a team. You can do that every single week if you want to. You could do multiple teams per week if you'd like. Definitely something that you can get into. Someone says they're in 4 leagues. 3 are $100 and 1 is $300. It's an expensive football season, but you know what? It's worth it at the end if you're good at it. All right, so does anyone have any questions regarding the types of fantasy football leagues that there are, the scoring systems for fantasy leagues, the types of services that you can use for fantasy football, or the best pieces of information? If you have any questions, put them in the comments below the video. This is going to be highlighted on my Twitch channel at Bad Karma Lucky. This is going to be on the YouTube channel. Also, the podcast will be available, if I can figure it out, on iTunes and on the Google Play Store. I plan to have guests in on this every once in a while, so probably people that I play fantasy football with or that I have played fantasy football. Could be just friends of the show, friends of the channel. Who knows? It could be anyone. So if that's something you guys are interested in, or you have feedback for the show, any suggestions, or you have questions that we didn't get to during the show, go into the Discord and type it into the podcast suggestions channel. We'll pick it up from there. Anyway, again, this is the Fantasy Twitch with Bad Karma Lucky. You can find me at twitch.tv/badkarmalucky. You can see the Twitter on the overlay over there. It is at Bad Karma Lucky. The Discord link is right below that. I will put all the information as well in the description of the video. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you next time. Peace. Alright, we're gonna get a timestamp there, 48:06. Cool.